This evening our subject is the hero mythology of the Nordic people and the Germanic peoples. And this is really a very large subject because it divides into a broad group of legendary and lore, almost any part of which could constitute a complete discussion. We will try, however, to establish certain broad patterns, and each individual will be the better if he fills in some of the material himself. There is no group of symbols that so quickly suggest interpretation or are more stimulating to the imagination and ingenuity of the thoughtful person. The Nordic mythology probably originated in Asia and was brought to the Scandinavian area by a Scythian prince called Sigi. This migration, which included a long trek across most of Europe, was accomplished sometime probably from 1 to 5 centuries before the beginning of the Christian era. Some places a little later. The dates are unobtainable. After he had established himself at Uppsala, this Prince Sigi formed a sacred college or school and gradually was transformed by lore and legendary into the deity Odin. This, however, while it answers some questions, creates more than it answers. For we know that at a comparatively early date, possibly as the development of the ritualism of a religious system required, the story of Odin took upon itself cosmological and universal implications, and whatever roots or foundations may have been historical were soon lost or totally obscured. The Nordic rites and mysteries and legends are contained in these great poetic works which we call the sagas and the Eddas. They are magnificent examples of literary achievement, rich in wonderful metered verse, deep, wise, but in their present forms not especially ancient. The compilation of these works from oral tradition was comparatively late in terms of historical antiquity. We know, however, that the content was of very much older inception. And then gradually this lore and legendary migrated into the Teutonic states and established itself firmly along the course of the river Rhine. This transplantation of ideas naturally had psychological overtones. The Teutons had a somewhat different personal and national entity than the Nordics of the Scandinavian area. And so we find the legends and stories taking on new coloring, local atmosphere, and mingling with the hero tales already present in the Germanic folklore. The third great step in the development of our story occurs in the 19th century with the rise of the Wagnerian music drama. Richard Wagner built his great cycle of the Ring of the Nibelung upon the Sigurd Saga, the Nordic work relating to the hero of the tribe of the Volsungs, the hero of the world. Yet Wagner was by nature not one inclined merely to perpetuate an ancient law. He was a man of very involved mental and emotional structure, and he was also deeply concerned over the production of great music ritual. To achieve these ends, he took the Sigurd Saga and other related material and created what might almost be termed a Wagnerian mythology. The elements are derived from ancient sources, but the arrangements have been changed. The patterns have been readapted, and a broad and scattered group of legends have been tied into one consistent story. Yet when the work was finished, we have perhaps in the Nibelungen cycle one of the most powerful mythological developments in the entire history of man. Wagner gave us a new mythology, deeply involved in his own convictions, but with some evidence within it that it is far more than merely the ingenuity of a great artist. Wagner, in some way, captured a spirit, perhaps more effectively than the old bards, and he brought it together in one of the most unique compositions of meaning that has ever been assembled. And he strengthened and integrated this entire pattern with his music, developing a philosophy of leitmotifs, or recurring musical themes, by which he supplied a musical key to each step of the unfoldment of his story. In this, then, we have almost a new mystery ritual, and those who have seen the complete structure of the ring cannot fail to recognize a symbolic work that might almost be considered equal to the great Eleusinian mysteries and rituals of Greece or the Osirian cycle of Egypt. What has not apparently, however, been generally considered is that Wagner had as his aim the creation of a Teutonic scripture, and he divided this scripture almost as in the case of the Jewish Christian Bible. He divided it into an Old Testament and a New Testament. And his Old Testament was the ring, and his New Testament was the great cycle of the Grail. These two highly related works not only present almost identical casts of characters, but are the two necessary parts of one great pageant. The pageant that begins with the building of the wonderful house of the gods on Valhalla and ends in the temple of the Holy Grail on Montsalvat in northern Spain. The solemnity and sublimity of this cycle is obscured for most persons by the weight of the music development and by the long hours of listening and watching that are necessary. but they are most repaid if we have the patience to go through with them. Thus, in developing our story this evening, we're going to sort of crisscross between the three groups of legends in an effort to determine, if possible, certain relevant and valuable elements. We're going to have something to say about the Odin of the sagas, something about the Wotan of the Rhine, and also something about the Wotan of Wagner. For these are all different entities, although presumably the development of one concept. Our concern primarily this evening is the story of the descent of the world hero. And in this case, the emphasis is strongly and clearly indicated in the Wagnerian cycle and also in the great Sigurd cycle. For Sigurd is Siegfried, the hero of the world. Yet in bringing these related elements into one brief pageantry, Wagner has given us numerous important analogies and helped to tighten the picture, tighten the story for our use. Assuming, as we must, that the roots of the entire theory are in Asia, we are not therefore surprised to find that the universe of the sagas and Eddas is an Asiatic universe, brought into being by the same general patterns and forces that we find in the great Puranas and the creation literature of the Hindus. There are three worlds. There must always be three worlds. And in the Nordic ritual, these worlds, as in nearly all other great religious systems, constitute a spiritual universe, an invisible causal creation, or state, a vast diffusion of power. A diffusion which later becomes more or less involved in the music of the Rhine, which constantly recurs in the Wagnerian cycle and is forever telling us of the vast patterns of space that lie behind the manifestation of things. The second universe is a universe of mind, and this mental universe is between the superior and the inferior creations. This mental universe is the servant of spirit and lord over matter. And there is a world, a mortal world, a world in which human beings, particularly the tribe of the Volsung, struggle against strange and involved fates and destinies. And the entire plan of creation is circumscribed by a strange melancholy that tells us that all that lives must die, all that is born must fade away. The gods and the heroes, the great and the small, the good and the bad, must be swallowed up, ultimately, in the twilight of the gods. It is a very nostalgic theme, and yet moving with the solemn grandeur of ritual, unfolding like a high mass. It commands our attention and consideration from the beginning. Over the whole vast mystery broods the eternal spirit of All-Father. All-Father, formless, actually nameless, without boundary or limitation, simply forever there, forever observing, never interfering, forever permitting, never denying. By his own immense and incredible silence, confounding both gods and men. For even the greatest of the immortal mortals and the mortal immortals cannot know all Father, nor cannot know his will. They may bear upon their lances and their spears the runes of sacred wisdom, but the mystery of allness, of the beginning and the end, of the endless ring that goes on, producing worlds from itself and returning them to itself unto everlastingness. This is all in the mystery of All Father. And the old Nordic had no way of even brooding upon this mystery, but he sort of conceived it in a strange way as brooding upon him, foreverness, observing him, knowing him, and yet he never able to remove the veil which conceals the ultimate of cause and the ultimate of effects. And in the nature and being and time of All Father, which goes on and on and on, forever and forever, there is a vast abyss, and the depths of this no man can touch, and the substance of this no man can understand. It was like some strange cosmic fjord, cutting deep into the infinite belowness of things. For this is what the German mystic Böhme later called bis and abyss, time and eternity, nothing and all. And with the same broad brush that mythologists are always permitted to paint with, this abyss was bounded upon one extremity by great cliffs of fire, and on the other extremity by great cliffs of ice. And this fire and this ice, these were forever combating together, so to say, for the heat of one and the cold of the other, caused a vast mist to form in the great abyss. And this abyss was somewhere in the infinite nature of All Father. And the fire was the fire of All Father, and the cold and the ice were also his. For he in some way was master of light and darkness, heat and cold. Some have suggested that these ancient peoples were trying to work with the concept of the duality of electricity and magnetism, polarization in space. We cannot say, but it certainly sounds as though they were thinking in that way. And from all time, there were also great giants. For there were giants upon the earth, or in the worlds of those days. And those at the north were the giants of ice, glistening and gleaming with bodies made of glaciers. And those at the south were giants of fire, reaching out flaming arms and howling and shrieking in the incredible combustions. And these giants hurled ice and fire into the great depths. And the name of the great deep, the cleft that went on forever, was Gunungagap. And here, as the result of the minglings of frost and fire, rose great clouds of hoarfrost, immense, strange, frosty mists. And these whirled and swirled and twisted and turned through the ages, until gradually they formed themselves into a strange shape. And this shape was that of a giant, an immense and incredible being who filled the whole of space like some vast embryo within the womb. A giant composed of fire and ice, of heat and cold, of light and darkness, of life and death. And the name of this giant was Ema, and he had one eye. And he writhed and twisted and turned in this great uterine abyss. And in the course of time, this great giant became like a world, vast and immense. And from his frosty and icy surfaces, things began to grow and to live. And then again, by that broad stroke, which we cannot account for, there wandered from we know not where, because there is no record to tell us, the last thing we would assume to be present under such conditions. And that was a kindly, gentle cow. And this cow was called the Great Mother. And this Great Mother perhaps is Hathor, the cow goddess of Egypt. Perhaps she is any one of the mysterious beast deities which we find in ancient times. All we know about the Great Cow Mother was that she was forever in need of salt. For without salt, she could not live. That is the reason the Roman soldiers were paid their salaries, because the word salary means salt, and was necessary for their keeping, and later it became a little confused with good Roman coinage, but it was still the salt of salvation, without which man could not live, in this case his wages. But the cow mother was in great need of salt. And so while she was wandering around upon this strange frosty body of Ymir, seeking salt, she began to lick the ice. And with her great moist warm tongue she was seeking salt. But instead of salt, she licked out of the ice 3 sleeping gods who had been resting there from no one knows when. And the most important to us of these gods that was brought out of the ice was Odin the All-Father. Not the supreme being, not the great one, but the first of the gods. And Odin, with his brothers who were also licked from the ancient ice, turned upon the hoarfrost giant, their eternal father, Ymir, and slew him. And from the body of Ymir, the great primordial being, these gods fashioned the world. And they fashioned the world by raising up the skull of Ymir and formed of it the bowl of heaven. And they also then called upon 4 little elemental dwarfs to come to their assistance: Ordri, Sudri, Nordri, and Vestri, from which we have north, east, south, and west, and they placed these at the corners of the skull to hold it up. Then they took the body of Ymir and they formed the earth. And they took his hair and they made vegetation. And the body began to rot. And out of the rotting of the body crawled all kinds of living things, tiny lives, living out of putrefaction. And these slowly populated the earth and grew and increased until they became species and tribes and ultimately races of beings. And in this great world that was formed from the body of Ymir, they took his eyebrows and they put them around the edge of the world so that men would not fall off. And they called this great flat disk which they had fashioned Midgard. And in order to further protect everything, the gods placed around this the Midgard serpent, a great serpent that dwelled in the bottom of ocean, an ocean extended from land to the eyebrows of Ymir. And in the bottom of the ocean was this great serpent, who was as large and long as the distance around the earth, so that it remained forever with its tail in its mouth, the symbol of the serpent of eternity. And this serpent sometimes was angry, and sometimes it writhed and twisted in the bottom of the ocean, causing storms and earthquakes and all kinds of strange and terrible phenomena. Now we have something else that comes in this pattern also. When Odin, who had brought all these things about and had fashioned his creatures according to his own kind, realized that the time had come to bring order out of chaos. He caused a tree to be planted in the lowest parts of the body of Ema. And this tree, like the spinal cord of a giant, grew up through the three worlds and became the tree Yggdrasil, the tree of existence, the tree of the world and of life. And all things that lived upon this tree, and around the midst of the tree was placed this great disk which we call the earth. And in the midst of this earth there rose a mountain, and this mountain was called the Mountain of the Gods. And here Odin, calling upon all the elemental powers and forces of nature, whom Wagner later introduces under the name of the great giants, builds his castle, his palace, his throne of rulership, the magnificent hall of judgment and of counsel, which is called Asgard. And here, with his gods, forming together the sacred circle of 12 like the Olympian deities, Odin ruled his world, his universe. And from a great throne on the very peak of his palace he gazed out upon all things, and was ever mindful, like Zeus, of everything that happened in the world. And he had ravens that went forth to all corners of space and brought him messages. And then also on the great slopes of the mountain of the gods he built the glorious palace of Valhalla. And this great wonderful palace was made of the shields of heroes upheld by the spears of conquerors. It was the place of feasting of the blessed dead, and those who died in the defense of the gods, or nobly and worthily upon the field of battle, were picked up by the Valkyrie, the virgin daughters of Odin, and carried by them upon their 8-footed steeds to the wonderful banquet hall of Valhalla. Here, according to the legends, we had a real Nordic paradise, where men fought all day, their wounds were healed at sunset, and they feasted all night. The next morning they were all ready to fight again. What could be a more cozy and truly earth-like situation? I think it should have been set here instead of elsewhere, because that is about our way of life in a large symbolical picture. It makes little difference whether we're fighting industrially or economically or from a militant standpoint. It's struggle for food in order that we may eat to struggle some more. Now, also in the preparation of this universe, the tree went down far below the surface of the Midgard world of men into a strange primordial darkness beneath, which was called Helheim, from which we have our word hell. But in their case, the word did not imply hot as it does with us, but cold. And when some missionaries went to the Eskimos, they had to do the same thing with the Christian concept, because a fiery perdition was too inviting and suggested sin to these frozen souls. But down in the bottom of this abyss were also at the roots of the tree of life, which was rooted in the strange residue, the strange decomposition of the body of Ema, at the very bottom of the great Gununga gap in which the tree grew. At the roots of this tree, fate, the mysterious power of destiny to which even Odin must bow, placed a great host of worms, horrible little eating, gnawing things, with all the best attributes of a California termite. The purpose of these worms was to gnaw through the roots of the world tree, kill it, and destroy it forever. And also down in this same abyss was a stream, a stream that flowed like the waters of Lethe through the underworld, and also like the waters of Mnemosyne were the abodes of memory. And this stream poured into a pool, and this pool was under the keeping of a strange ancient god of fates, a god so old that, inconsistent as it may be, he was not included among the creations that Odin made, even though Odin was supposed to have begun it all. This god was nothing but a huge face, a strange, immense, melancholy, icy countenance, gazing forever out over the rim of the pool which he guarded. And this god was named Mimir, and this was his pool, and it was the pool of memory. And Odin, having set his world in such order as he could, and still burdened with all the doubts and misgivings that attend creativity in almost any field, especially in so large and arbitrary an undertaking, realizing that he had fashioned a world without knowing why, that he had created something without the sanction of Allfather because he did not know what Allfather meant. Odin did not know where he had come from. He did not know when he was born, because he was a grown man when he was licked out of the ice for the great cow. He knew nothing of his own origin. He knew nothing of his own destiny. Therefore, realizing that unless we know origin and destiny, we can never survive, Odin went down to the source of all wisdom, the great glazy face of Mimir, in the darkness of the subconscious, of the unconscious, of the deepest and most profound roots of the self. And Mimir listened to the cry of the god, and told him very frankly that if he wished wisdom in addition to all his other glories, he must make a great sacrifice for it. And Odin swore upon his spear that he would make any sacrifice. And Mimir said, all right, if you want wisdom, then pluck out one of your own eyes and cast it into my pool. And without a moment's hesitation, Odin plucked out an eye and cast it into the pool of Mimir. And it was then that Mimir whispered to him the secrets of the runes, or the great laws of Allfather. And he told him many wonderful things, but he refused to tell Odin his own origin or his own destiny. These he could not and would not tell. But Odin, having received all other things, and having cut the runes or the sacred characters into his spear shaft, returned again to the upper world. There brooded longer over the mystery of it all. Resolved to go further, he listened to the voice of oracles and to whispers that came to him out of the great mystery of space, that if a man would live forever, he must die. And only those who gave their lives could keep them, and those who lost their lives in the search of truth would regain them into everlastingness. He had already given an eye, because if his eye was single, his body was filled with light. Now he was asked by the mysterious voices of the ancients to give more, to die for life. So Odin went out upon the branches of the great tree Yggdrasil, and there hanged himself. And he hung there, but he did not die. And further wisdom and further understanding was given to him, and he survived the ordeal and was rescued and lived after having resolved to die. But the gods also whispered to him that he could not die until the great day had come. So Odin learned that he could not die, that he could only wait. And in waiting, he completed all the wisdom that it was possible for him to possess. But in addition to wisdom, Odin had other factors that might contribute. For on this tree, the great Yggdrasil tree, there lived squirrels. And these squirrels formed a wonderful communication system. They would run up to the gods and listen outside the door of Valhalla, where they could hide in the doorways and peek under the doors, and got all the scandal. They then rushed down the tree to the roots where the demons were and told them all about it. Then they watched and listened until the demons and the spirits and the mysterious beings of the underworld, the creatures that lived in Elfheim and all these deep places, until they learned all the secrets from these. Then the squirrels ran up again and whispered it to the gods and kept everything more or less in a state of constant pandemonium. There is another interesting situation that comes, and that is that although Odin apparently was the first of the gods, he had to fight for his throne. He had to fight against something that suddenly looms out to us as older than he was. For somewhere in this mystery, there was a still more ancient deity. A deity who had long and primordially ruled in space and in chaos. And this being was Thor the Thunderer, the mysterious deity who had the power over the lightnings, and who carried in his hand a great hammer. And whenever he threw this hammer, it was like a boomerang. It struck its object and then returned to him again. And this hammer was in the form of a cross. And with this he overcame and destroyed all evil monsters. And at one time he even tried to capture the Midgard snake that encircled the earth. But the serpent was so great that it pulled the bottom out of the boat on which Thor was standing. But this Thor was a mighty man of ancient times, a mighty force. And it was finally necessary for Odin to come into combat with Thor. He did not destroy him, but by the power of the runes and of magic and of the wisdom of Mimir, he overcame Thor and accepted him into his order of gods. And Thor became the faithful servant of the new order of deities. By this time we begin to see that the universe is more or less in order. And we see Odin presiding over the great council. But also we observe, even in these early days, that tragedy is ever near. In order to build his great castle at Asgard, Odin had made a pact with the giants. He had promised to give them a great treasure, the goddess of beauty. But when the palace was finished, he broke his word and did not do what he had promised. Later, according to the Wagnerian cycle, he paid these giants with the treasure of the Nibelung, which had also been dishonestly acquired. And Odin came under a curse. And this curse gradually descended through ages of time, because an evil thing had been done. And this evil of broken honor would ultimately destroy all of the gods and their world and everything that pertained to it. Now, in order to keep the wonderful world of the gods happy and beautiful, Odin created out of himself another deity, his beloved son. And this beloved son was certainly the Christ hero of the Nordic peoples. He was called Balder the Beautiful. He was happiness, joy, peace, love. In all things, he was the ideal of everything that was different from the strange, rugged, old gods who had sired him, because he believed in song and music and art. He believed in poetry, and he was forever shining, and his head was surrounded with light, and his light brought peace and joy to men and to the whole world. And in the time when he was created to meet the evil things, Odin went to every living creature upon the earth and bound them with an oath that not one of them would ever injure Balder the Beautiful. Not a rock would permit itself to be thrown upon him. Not a tree would allow a branch to be fashioned into an arrow or a spear to injure him. Not a human being would touch him. Everything was bound by an oath. And Odin was very confident that perhaps he had outwitted this strange, morbid destiny that hung over. But destiny is greater even than the gods of the Northland. For in his great pact with life, he had asked everything and everyone except one. And he had failed to ask a little branch of mistletoe that grew high on another tree. He had asked the tree, but he had not noticed the mistletoe. Now it was obvious that such a circumstance was very humiliating to the mistletoe. So that instead of being happy with everything else in this voluntary agreement, the mistletoe developed a grudge. It would have been perfectly willing to have agreed, but was very, very unhappy because it had not been asked. And it was later that Loki, the adversary, that evil spirit that is forever present, the god of fires, the backbiter, the cynical one, the Mephisto of the divine group, that Loki should discover this fact, and to revenge himself upon Odin, he caused an arrow to be fashioned of this mistletoe. And he placed this arrow in the bow of Hoda, the blind god. And he pointed the arrow because the blind god would not knowingly have done this, but he was blind and did not know what he was aiming at. And as a result of that, this blind god slew Balder the Beautiful. There is another legend to the effect that everyone fired arrows and stones at Balder as a game because they knew none could touch him. And then Loki insinuated this arrow into the game and thus brought about the death of Balder. There are many legends, but this is the substance. Balder the Beautiful died. And with the death of Balder, all the joy of the gods died. And when this occurred, Odin knew that he could never outwit the inevitable, that the time had come and must come when the way of the mysterious destinies of things would be fulfilled. He had never been able to fathom the mystery of All-Father. He had never been able to determine the secret of the world. He did not possess the power to form things in eternity, only in time, and that time must end. So this melancholy struggle against inevitables follows on down through the entire story of the ring. And then Odin reconsiders the possibility that if he can never achieve the mystery, perhaps the world can be saved in another way. Perhaps the mystery can be solved, if not by him, by something that he creates. So he set himself apart to fashion and dream forth a creation that should save the world and save him. He would devise a strategy, and he created in his wisdom a people set aside to do his will, a chosen people. And these people were called the Volsungs, the race that was fashioned by Odin himself, bred from his seed, and was to produce, as from the tree of a race, as its final fruit, its final harvest, the hero of the world. Now, Odin believed that when Sigmund and Sieglinde came along, that Sigmund would become the father of the hero, or might even become the hero himself. But again, strange powers of fate intervened. Because Sigmund and Sieglinde, brother and sister, fell in love with each other. And as a result of this incestuous union, the great goddess of law and virtue, Odin's wife, demanded that Odin destroy his own children for having broken the laws that were upon the runes, or upon the spear inscribed with runes. Broken-hearted, Odin was forced to prevent the very thing which he had sought to attain. But Odin had thoughts, and these thoughts had wings. And of these thoughts there was born his beloved thought, the thought which is himself. Brunhilde, the goddess of the Valkyrie. And in Wagner's opera, Wotan speaks to Brunhilde as his other self, as his own real thinking. And he sends her as his thought in disobedience, and causes her to save the infant son of Sigmund and Sieglinde, and to take him away and hide him, because he was the heir to the Volsung. He was the last of this great line, and he must become the hero of the world. So was born Sigmund, who was truly a widow's son, posthumously born, who knew neither his parents nor his origin, nor his destiny, any more than did Parzival in the second part of the cycle, the Grail cycle, who, when asked of his ancestry, could reply only that his mother, Herzeleda, was the sorrow of the world. And so Siegfried, or Sigmund, lived, brought up by a Nibelung himself, brought up by a little dwarf. And he had the broken sword of his father, Sigmund, the sword that must sometime break the spear of Odin. And he cast and mended the great sword Nothung. And he became the hero of the world. He achieved all the wonders that are familiar to the concept of the Nordic and Germanic hero. And in the case of Sigurd, he slew the giant Fafnir, who guarded the treasure of the Nibelung. He became master over many things. In the Teutonic version, he begins what Wagner calls the great Rhine journey, the journey of life down the river Rhine. But Odin knows, unfortunately, and can do nothing about it, that the hero of the world is journeying only to death. That by the strange laws of fate, nothing can change the work of the Norns, the three grey sisters who spin forever the thread of destiny. Odin makes one last great effort, and as Wotan in the Wagnerian cycle calls upon Erda, the Earth Mother, begging her to reveal the secret, the mystery of survival, but she is silent. And so Siegfried, continuing down the great river Rhine, goes his way to the house of the Gibertjung, where at last he perishes with the spear of Hagon in his back. And with the death of Siegfried, the hope of Odin or Wotan for his world, the whole regency of the world created in the dim past out of the frost of Ginnungagap. The whole hope ends. Now this is the signal in the Sigurd Saga for the last great war. Wagner summarizes it very briefly in the Götterdämmerung. Following the great immolation scene in which Brunhilde rides her horse into the funeral pyre, the waters of the Rhine rise, being the waters of space. We hear the second theme of the Rhine maidens, and we see them capturing the ancient ring from the drowning Hagen and carrying it back again to the mysterious abode of the gold of immortality in the depths of the Rhine. Then the waters rise and the universe ends, but the waters do not quite reach the sky. The temple of the gods falls, but there is one mountain peak that survives, and in this mountain peak there hides a man and a woman. And when the floods subside, they are the new Adam and Eve. And with the gods who are gone, the old order passed forever, these two are fruitful and replenish the earth, and the gentle pastoral world of man as we know it came into existence. So much for the Wagnerian termination. For the Sigurd Saga, we have a much more dramatic termination. Odin, at the end of his dream, realizing that with the death of Sigurd, the great hope of the Nibelung, the great hope of the Volsung is ended, becomes part of a very intense climactic drama that begins to unfold. First, Odin realizes that the moment of the Ragnarok is at hand, the day of the dissolution, when the armies of light and darkness must meet upon the great plain of battle to fight or survival, when the gods and demons, when life and death must come in the great Armageddon. And so Odin and his gods, his aces, his deities, draw themselves up before the great palace of Asgard, and as they watch the pits of perdition open, from Helheim and all the distant places come the monsters. The Midgard serpent rises, fire belching from the sea. Loki, long prisoned in the earth, bursts his bonds and comes raging with flames upon the field of battle. The spirits and souls of the dead who have passed to damnation appear riding in ships made of human fingernails. The saga, the legends become more and more strange until finally comes the great battle itself, the heroes paired off against the villains, each one slaying his enemy and at the same time slaying himself. And in the very heart of the battle, at the very heat of it, the earth begins to shake and quiver. The worms, gnawing at the roots of the tree of life, have gnawed it through. Yggdrasil tree with the three worlds falls back into the abyss of space. Gods and demons, heaven, earth, and hell vanish away forever, and nothing remains but the mist and the great gap in space and the strange, mysterious, ever-brooding presence of All-Father, who is neither pleased nor displeased, who is neither satisfied nor dissatisfied, but simply remains forever, observing, knowing, and silent. In substance, that is all we can do at the moment with the outline of the legend. Now we've got to go into certain parts of it. But that gives you perhaps some little concept the way some bard might have spent an evening telling fragments or elements of the story. Naturally, we've had to abridge them and leave out many important and relevant parts. But anyway, this is to a degree the spirit of it. Now, what do we have actually when we are dealing with this? We have the problem of many worlds and many levels and many planes brought together in a strange composite. Obviously, from all the accounts, the world of Odin and his gods, the world that passed away in the Ragnarok, is not the physical world we know. Actually, Ragnarok, while it might have some historical, geological relationship to Atlantis or something of that nature, does not basically mean a catastrophe or cataclysm that took place in the material world. Perhaps even the sinking of Atlantis has another meaning also. Perhaps this submerging of a great empire has something to do with the submerging of consciousness, that it is a vast psychological symbol and not merely a factual incident, although it may have foundations or be tied, as most legends are, to some appropriate factual circumstance. Odin is never born. He comes out of the ice. He is awakened from sleep by the heat of the cow mother licking the ice. We apparently have in Odin the concept of universal mind. Universal mind, which is the demigod, the immortal mortal. Mind can solve every mystery except the mystery of itself, and has remained in this condition ever since. Mind can rule matter, but it can never fathom the depths of consciousness. Mind can order everything inferior to itself, but cannot order itself. Mind can give man a knowledge of all environmental things, or all things which may be weighed, estimated, and polarized. And the world over which mind rules was polarized by the struggle of the frost giants and the flame giants. And so perhaps ruling as regent over creation is this universal mind, which was not born, but was released from sleep or ice. This ice is not so different from the Egyptian use of the symbol, because ancient peoples found that ice was a preservative. Much earlier than the Roman Empire, fish were brought hundreds and thousands of miles across land by being packed in ice for the amazement and entertainment of Oriental monarchs and Roman emperors. Men knew the principle of refrigeration, and they knew that ice preserved. Therefore, in a strange way, the cosmic suspension, which they recognized in this Nordic land, that creation was periodic. It was a great wave that came out and retired again, like the ebbing and flowing of the sea. And after the day of manifestation was the great night of suspense or suspension, in which everything remained unchanged or immovable, or was preserved, or caused to float over the abyss like Noah in his wonderful ark. And this thing, everything held as though in a strange fantasy, in a strange grip of sleep, seemingly represented the ice, which like some archetypal structure held things unchanging, undiminishing, until they were released again. The cow mother, of course, represents nature, or the principle of natural emergence. And nature itself, apparently by these people, was assumed to be the power which brought forth intellect, or released the mind from sleep, probably because nature ultimately produced those kinds of forms in which mind could express itself or be released into manifestation. Thus nature releases mind by building bodies, refining faculties, and making possible the manifestation of an intellectual power. So Odin is the demiurgus of the Greeks, the Zeus, or the Jupiter of the Latins, not the supreme deity, but the regent of a world, a level of existence. And Odin occupied this middle distance. And Odin, as mind, moving upon the face of chaos, broke it, destroyed it, and fashioned cosmos from its remains. Thus mind brings order out of chaos. Mind destroys the sleeping giant of matter. Mind releases the energies that are locked within it. Mind, in its various polarizations, represented by its two brother deities, also turns ultimately and overcomes the power. It comes again in the Hindu mythology, the great tree that grows upon Meru. It is again the tree of revelation, the tree of life in the Garden of Eden. It is the great concept of the unfoldment of all things in an orderly manner. And the tree has its roots in the unconscious. It has a certain superconsciousness above it, represented by the palace of the gods, and it has its middle distance, or man's normal consciousness. And it places, therefore, the abode of man twixt heaven and earth dominion wielding. It causes man to be in a moderate zone, a temperate field between the superior and the inferior unknowns. And also it produces within man the concept of evolution, because in some mysterious way the temple of Asgard, with its palace of the heroic dead, is also the New Jerusalem, the great temple of Olympus, the gods upon Meru, and the Buddhist sanctuary of Shambhala. All these are symbols of that which is to come at the end of the great war of life, those places to which the heroes go. And of course the Nordic heroes, dying on the field of battle and picked up by the Valkyrie and carried to Valhalla. These hero tales relate to the adept tradition, and those who have achieved the conscious service of the mysterious world mind that guides all things. Now this world mind, in the process of growth, unfolding as it has through the great stream of life, has discovered, for example, that it must sacrifice an eye in Mimer's pool, because it must achieve concentration. It must unite itself. It must have single purpose. It must see all things singly and with internal apperception. It must also pass through a certain death that it may live. And it is interesting that Odin should have been recognized by the Romans as equivalent to their Mercury. And both Odin and Mercury were often regarded as gods of thieves, because the thief so often ended hanging on the gibbet, in the same way as Odin hanging on the tree of life. Also, we know that the legends of Odin gave rise to the story of the Pied Piper of Hamelin. The Pied Piper was originally Odin, who mysteriously drew all the children with him into the mountain, and it closed forever. All these legends, like the legends of the great huntsman, and all these stories have their origin in the same tradition. Odin, therefore, proceeds through all of the various procedures and developments of mind. But mind, almost like Hamlet, is a melancholy dame, because mind, in its own pure nature, within itself, according to these people, was frustrated forever by the realization of its own mortality. Mind is not immortal. The works of mind are not eternal. Mind can build a regency in space, but everything that is fashioned by mind must disintegrate again. And the struggle of mind to become conscious is represented by the struggle of Odin to achieve to the knowledge of reality. Now for Mimir, and by the sacrifice of an eye, Odin gains something. He gains the mystery of the runes. And the runes are universal law. Through concentration of his resources, through the increasing penetrating power of one pointed reason, by science, which may be the one eye of reason, or the mind, man has gradually learned by degrees the laws governing nature. He has explored nature step by step, and inscribed upon his lance the runes. and has used these as the basis of fabricating laws for the rulership of his empire. In other words, he has copied his own ways from the ways of nature. And he has the power to master such knowledge as he may gain from the underworld, because the only deity with whom he could converse was the ancient crystal face of Mimer. And this face of Mimer, of course, is the reflecting face of nature, in which man may learn the mystery of everything except himself. That he may not learn. Mimer is the mirror which every thinker holds before his own mental eye to see the reflection of himself and call it truth. This mystery is unfolded in great detail along the way of our story. So Odin stands forth as a kind of hero. Odin and Moses have something very interesting in common. Moses was permitted to come as far as the mountain of Moab and there look across upon the promised land, but he was not permitted to enter because he had disobeyed the Lord when he had been angry with the rock and when he had broken the tablets of the law. Therefore it remained for Jehoshua the son of Nun to lead the children of Israel into the promised land. And Moses saw the land from afar, and lay down upon the hills of Moab, and was gathered unto his fathers. So Moses, although he led the children of Israel as a great lawgiver, having upon the tablets of the law those very laws that were upon the rune spear of Odin, having walked as the friend of God, was not permitted to enter the promised land. Well, who was? Jehoshua, which is the original name of Jesus, the son of the fish, Nun meaning fish. So we have a strange, mysterious analogy there, that someone else beside Moses, the hero of the world, by prophecy, must lead the children of Israel into the promised land. It is the same with Odin. Odin could not perfect the creation, even that he had fashioned himself. He needed the breath of All-Father. He needed the supreme sanction of deity, but deity was forever silent. It never spoke. It never answered. It never revealed itself. And yet, strangely, Odin knew it was present, because he felt something which was symbolized by the Norns, the endless winding thread of fate. Fate that was as much an enigma to the mind as it was to the rest of mankind. And Odin fashioned from himself Balder the Beautiful, representing the highest and most noble parts of the mind. In fact, Odin began in the experiment of Balder to create the concept of the psychic self, or the world soul. But Loki, the power of perversion, the animal instincts, caused blind Hoda to drive the mistletoe arrow and destroy this first abortive concept of soul, because excess destroys soul. And Loki, the god of fires and passion, was excess. Odin, however, did not intend or would not give up entirely the great dream that he had. So he began the ingenious development out of himself of a great order of living things. And these living things were to be the redeemers of himself. He created, first as an archetype, a concept within his own mind, and ultimately as a projection from himself, the heroic race, the race of the Volsung, the people who should carry on, who should save him, who should redeem him. And this race of the Volsung, according to the Nordic concept, must be considered as symbolizing pre-Adamite man. In other words, universal mind producing archetypal man. Humanity not upon this earth as we know it, but upon the world that was to pass away, a world of dreams, a world surrounded by the great oceans, or perhaps that world bordered by the Rhine, flowing forever like the river of Tao, or the river of time and eternity, through the mysterious fatherland of the Teutonic people. So the Volsung represent the creatures or the creation which was to produce the hero of the world, and the hero of the world, of course, is man. Man in whom mind has invested its greatest wealth and its most perfect treasures. And mind carefully, systematically proceeds to the production of what Nietzsche and Schopenhauer have distinguished as the Superman. This is the Superman also in the concept of Marx and Engels. It is the man planned by absolute mentality. The man who is the product of perfect skill. The man who is fashioned with absolute efficiency. But the man who carries within himself the inevitable death of himself. Because Odin, like so many ambitious parents, invested his offspring with his own dream. Because actually he created the race of the Volsung not for its sake, but to save himself, to preserve and perfect his own creation, believing that he could fashion a creature that could excel him and could do things which he was bound by obligation and oath that he could not do, but which he wanted to do. And he preserved this through his thought, Brunhild, who finally saved Sigurd, the last of the Volsung. But in this plan of his, he produced an incest. For these Volsungs became symbolically personified in Sigmund and Sieglinde, brother and sister who fell in love with each other. And she, running away from her lawful husband, broke the law of marriage. For these reasons, the great goddess of the home ordered Odin to destroy this couple who had sinned without knowing it, and who therefore carried upon themselves the blind guilt of Odin himself. But Siegfried or Sigurd was saved to become the mysterious power of the hero. And we study his achievements and the four worlds through which he moved and the four spheres of life which he conquered. For we have man now appearing as Lord of elements and of material worlds and of things to come, but man still psychological, man still archetypal. We have, however, from the beginning of this, a strange conflict. Siegfried or Sigurd turned upon his own ancestor Odin. He broke the spear on which were written the runes of the law. He destroyed the law of old. He also rescued and fulfilled a phase of Odin's life by saving the thought of Odin, Brunhild, from the ring of flames, as we find in the story of the Valkyrie. We find that he also slew the dragon, guardian of the treasure of the Nibelung. He therefore emerges once more as the dragon slayer, as St. George, as Merodach, as all the deities who have turned upon evil or have turned upon another kind of chaos and destroyed it. Odin destroyed the frost giant Ymir. Sigurd destroys the giant who has taken the dragon form, Fafnir. He bathes himself in the blood of the dragon, according to good alchemical formula. But the leaf falls upon his shoulder, and on that spot, like Achilles, he is still mortal. It is there that the spear of Hagen finally pierces him. By this time it becomes evident that the great journey of Siegfried as the mind-engendered hero, as the gradual extension of the will of Odin, that this journey, like the one who created it or brought it into being, is burdened by an absolute fatality that can never be averted and can never be destroyed. And so it is said that in the ancient world of things, this mind projection of law must ultimately die. Now, what does this mean on a psychological level? The Buddhist would tell us that the hero of the world, the tribe of the Volsung, and its final establishment in Sigurd, is the integration of the human ego. The ego is Siegfried, or Sigurd, the hero of the world, created primarily for the purpose of preserving its own father or source, the mind complex, and destined by its own nature to die with mind. The ego of man is this mysterious principle of self-saving, and he who saves his life shall lose it. And he who loses his life in the name of reality shall find it again. Odin knew this when he hung himself, but he did not have a hold of the secret. It remained for Siegfried, symbolizing the world ego, to perish miserably, to fulfill the curse of the mind itself. So egoism has always been associated with the hero. And perhaps this is especially true of the Teutonic or Gothic hero, because it has always been a conqueror, a master, a ruler. The purpose of the ego is to establish its own supremacy over the universe. Its purpose also is to justify its own ancestor, the principle of universal mind. And yet mind, unable to solve its own destiny, creates or projects from itself the ego to achieve this end. But the ego is itself, like the mind, a slayer of the real, because even less than the mind can the ego solve the mystery of life. And yet, because it represents psychologically the compound of many subjective, psychic, by which the psychologist means mental and emotional foci, the ego gradually attains the arrogance which is its final destruction. Because the ego within itself, bathing in the blood of the dragon, believes it has achieved immortality. The blood of the dragon, again, is a mysterious psychic symbol. It is a symbol associated with the subjective life fields of the emotional plane of man's existence. Siegfried or Sigurd does not realize that it is still vulnerable, but the ego is always vulnerable. Because this ego, carrying with it the sword Noton, the restored emblem of the human will, the same sword which in different ministry, the sword Excalibur, that Arthur, the British hero, drew from the rock, even as the sword of Odin was drawn from the oak by Sigmund. All these symbols have to do with one basic account of the gradual integration of mind and its fulfillment in the concept of the human ego. The ego glorifies the mind. The mind, for its own purposes, sustains and seeks to immortalize the ego. Both in the end come finally to the Gananga gap, through the great darkness of the twilight of the gods. In another example of the theme of this story, we find the struggle of the psychic nature, as Wagner sets it forth in Brunhilde, with the ego as Siegfried, and from this study we begin to see the mysterious story of Siegfried's loss of memory and all the other elements of the account, and where finally the psychic field of energy, in the great immolation scene, dies upon the funeral pyre of the ego. It is quite an involved and complicated situation, but in the concepts of our modern knowledge of man, the various elements break down into the essential parts of a great story. Ragnarok, the age of fire and gravel, represented in the Götterdämmerung, the collapse of the entire universe, has two distinct possible meanings. In the terms of ancient mythology, it implies perhaps the concept of the fall of man, for it seems to precede the creation of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Therefore we referred to it as a pre-Adamite pageantry. But it also may have a strangely mournful, nostalgic quality, reminding us, as perhaps Odin the mind inwardly knew, that the entire universe of mind and all that it engenders must, like an insubstantial pageant faded, leave not a rack behind. The world of mind collapses in space. And yet, we love it so. We are so addicted to it that we do not realize that perhaps this is the answer to the strange destiny which today is causing us to be almost as neurotic as our Nordic ancestors. The Norsemen in the days of the sagas and the Eddas were very sad about everything. And in the days of Odin, they were tragically sad, because they knew that a strange and terrible end hung over them. They did not know what it was or when it would come. We are feeling a little bit that way ourselves these days. Instead of worms gnawing through the tree of life, we suspect that certain worms operating in large laboratories have devised means of destroying the world of which we are a part. And they have done it with the mysterious power of mind. They have done it with the tremendous strength of ego, for they tell us, frankly, that all they are seeking to do is to advance knowledge. They are not seeking to destroy anybody. They are not responsible for use. They are only responsible for progress. This, perhaps, is a little the way Odin was thinking when he created the hero to take his chestnuts out of the fire for him. The ego, which was to bear the blame, was to be the scapegoat, and was also ultimately to redeem his own creator. And yet when the ego finally came face to face with Odin in the narrow gap between the mountains, Odin found that his own creation was not a friend but an enemy. And first of all, this enemy struck the very runes from Odin's spear with the sword which Odin had bestowed upon his father. So all these things came home like strange dark birds to roost. And in this collapse of materialism, if we might like to think of it as such, in this twilight of the gods, which is the end of a world governed only by law, a world governed by the strange workings of mind and ego. In this moment, in the great battle, the hosts of light and darkness meet. Good and evil, reality and illusion, lock in immortal combat. The tree of life falls. All of these things descend into space, or in the German version, the river Rhine rises, higher, higher, and higher. And the song of the Rhine maidens is heard, the song of space again. All these things falling back into the strange eternal from which they came, where everything began in the Rhine and ends in the Rhine. In this concept, then, everything has its life and death, and the great hero cycle, the man who would be God, and the gods who would be men, go to sleep together in the common darkness. In this account, after the battle of the gods and godlings was all over, two little human beings who had hidden in a cave came forth, and physical or human mankind as we know it came into existence, in a pastoral and beautiful world in which there were no longer either gods or demons, but a world in which there were gardens and flowers, and the curse of the Rhine gold, or the curse of the gods, no longer burdened. This is undoubtedly a new heaven and a new earth, for it is so described in the sagas. A world that is to come, a world of peace, which can only follow when ambitions and hates and fears, when man's will to power, man's will to live, have both ceased, when all these things have passed away, and a strange pastoral simplicity rules over everything. In other words, as the Rosicrucian Maya says, the temple is the silence after the strivings. With the fall of the gods, the striving of the mind-born came to an end. Then came peace, and this is the peace that the Buddhist seeks in his nirvana, which is the dying out of the fires of selfhood. This is the samadhi of Vedanta. This is the eternal rest of mysticism. This is the return in peace to the Father's house. It means that at the end of all these strivings, the world hero and all his great cavalcade of pageantry disappear. And in the place of these things, there is instead the quietude of the impersonal, or the regenerated, or the redeemed being, who seeks only to be still, and to know the mystery of the gods. Then comes the further implication that it is only then that this creature that survives, in silence and in peace, standing alone in the great abyss of worlds, this being, silent, alone will know and hear the voice of the All-Father that Odin was never able to hear. Thus we have almost a statement of mysticism. We have the statement of blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth, and that all things are reserved for those who have achieved peace. All the strivings of mankind, whether in the universe, in the great political institutions of society, or within the human consciousness itself, all strivings are a form of the last great war, whether it be Armageddon of Christendom or the Kurukshetra of the Hindus. It is the battlefield of light and darkness, the battlefield of hope and fear, the battlefield of all polarized opposites in a universe engendered by polarity. Man lives in it and dies in it, dominated by these polarizations. The time comes when he achieves equilibrium, and when he has so accomplished, the poles of himself die. Polarization ceases in equilibrium, and all that remains is the quietude in which the voice of eternity can be heard. So while the story is mournful, it is mournful to a kind of human being who, by his nature and inclinations, will never be happy until he rules someone else. He will never be happy till he has conquered, like some Hitler, the whole world. Hitler loved the Nordic myths, but he overlooked the part that the world hero died with the rest. He overlooked the fact that all conquerors, all great material organizers of that nature have ended on a funeral pyre, usually burned like the empires of old, with their people and all their worldly goods. The whole empire dies together. Now Wagner gives us a remarkable touch in this particular thing, because to a measure, as we have suggested, this ends the great cycle of the old dispensation, the dispensation that ends in man's supreme disillusionment. For this realization of the error of fallacy of mortal mind is the great disillusionment that must come to the Superman and to those who believe that might is right. And so we come then to a brief summary which I would like to make of a few sections of the second act of the cycle, and that is the great cycle of the Grail, as particularly set forth in Parzival and Lohengrin. The Parzival section, of course, with its tremendous division into the 5 acts which represent the 5 senses of man and the 5 races, is a tremendous statement of the second half of the story. In place of the hero of the world, we have Parzival, the guileless fool, the one who knows nothing, is nothing, knows not where he came from, why he is here, or where he is going, has no veneration or reverence for anything, wanders about only from the standpoint of the most superficial and inadequate motivation, journeying only by senses from day to day, and remembering only faintly that he too was a widow's son. This character of Parzival as the guileless fool, weak, purposeless, meaningless, and possessing no attributes of a hero whatsoever, begins the cycle of the creation of the true hero, who begins not in the conspiracy of God, but in the simplicity of innocence and childhood. When Gurnemanz, who is the ancient Nestor, and now has become a sort of kindly Odin, is introduced, Odin and Gurnemanz are both symbols of world mind. But Odin is world mind as the world conqueror, and Gurnemanz as world mind as the world teacher, the ancient one, venerable out of experience, who has used mind to enrich consciousness instead of advance self. So Gurnemanz is the master over the squires, the young ones, who are learning to be knights of the Sangreil. And the word Sangreil itself has 2 possible pronunciations which are very interesting. Sangreil, the blood of the king, and Sangreil, the holy cup. This Sangreil or Sangreal is the symbol of spiritual illumination. It is the chalice of ecstasy which contains the ever-flowing blood of God, and this blood moving, flowing, twisting, turning forever in the Grail, is identical in its essential substance as the ever-flowing river Rhine. It is a reversal of the symbolism, but it is the same essential principle. Loki, or Alberach, or Hagen, or all three aspects of one principle, the power of the Nibelung, or of the underworld, these live again as Klingsor the magician, with his castle upon the peaks of Moorish Spain. Here also we have Amfortas, king of the Grail, who received the crown and honor from his father Titurel. Amfortas, bearing in his side the wound that will never heal, that was made with the holy spear when he attempted to cast it at an enemy. His own destructive use of the divine power wounded him. Here in this pageantry we see another mountain, not longer Asgard with its 12 aces or gods, but now the circle of the Grail Knights, the great humanitarians, the servants of truth, the servants of light. And we see Parzival, having slain the swan of inspiration and intuition, is cast from the garden as a fool, as a gander who should seek a goose. Even experience and wisdom does not recognize him. And then we find him cast out into the world. We find him passing through the magic garden of Klingsor, or illusion, where Kundry, the strange maiden who plays now the part of Brunhilde, is introduced with her robe of serpent skins. Kundry, who is a strange symbol of the mysterious Salome, the strange being that could never die because she had betrayed John the Baptizer. We find Kundry also as this divided psychic nature, serving the good by choice and the evil by necessity. We find her name, of course, curiously similar to the mysterious serpent power of India, the Kundalini. She is the serpent maiden, and she represents the psychic powers in man, which naturally would serve the good, but are bound by ambition and illusion to the garden of Klingsor. Like the famous crest of the Prince of Wales, she dies in the end at the foot of the Grail with the words, "I serve." In these symbols, then, we have the second act of this strange drama of the production of the world hero. We have the hero of mind disappearing, the hero of heart emerging. We have Parzival wandering around the world, searching, seeking, by the order of the quest, for the mysterious temple on the top of the mountains, where he had once been, but where he was too much of a fool to realize where he had been. And then, as the Black Knight, robed in armor, he returns up the mountain, is seen by Gunamons on the famous Good Friday occasion, removes his armor, and stands before much in the similitude of Christ. His feet are washed by Kundry, who wipes them like Mary of Magdala with her hair. And then, with the sacred spear aloft, Parzival enters the temple of the Grail, touches the wound of Amfortas which heals, performs the elevation of the host, and becomes in turn King of the Grail. Now, Wagner has done two very interesting things. In the old story of the Ring, he has brought in no Drota, no priest, no sacred person of earth. There is no mention of priesthoods or anything of that nature, because these things took place before there were priests, because they took place when the gods themselves administered their own world. And in Parsival, although this great sacred order is dedicated to the spear of Longinus and the cup of the Last Supper, these knights perform the Eucharist themselves. There is no priest in either section, because this takes place when priesthoods are no more, and when men create and perform the sacraments by mystical power within their own souls. The orders of chivalry represent the power of man, the eternal priest, and that each individual within himself must perform the sacrament of his own salvation. So in the second part, Parzival becomes the symbol of the archetypal hero of the world. No longer the hero born of mind, but rather the hero that represents the release of the universal or the divine, that bears witness, like the sotar, not to the power of intellect, but to the power of consciousness itself. For as the race of the Volsung were the begotten of Odin, so the race of the Grail, the great son of Orgin, were the begotten of the Father, the eternal power. Therefore, in the ancient cycle, it was believed that the universe that was destroyed by mind should be redeemed, restored, and brought back again by the eternal love of God. This is the love of the All-Father. It remains silent and unknown until it produced its own anointed. And its own anointed, of course, is the world's Savior. Whatever be the name, whatever be the estate, whatever be the station, and it has always been the doctrine of the world's Savior that it hath nothing in the prince of this world. The world hero of the ancient time, of the old dispensation, was the same world hero that is supposed to have tempted Jesus to exchange his divine birthright for the city of the plains. The same world hero that is represented by the face on Caesar's penny. It is the power of mortal things which hath nothing in God. Therefore, the great hero, the spiritual hero, represents the restoration of divine consciousness, or the restoration of man in a state of being which transcends mind and returns again to its own natural spiritual heritage. For it is only to these that the All-Father will speak, and it is only to those who have achieved this that the secret of foreverness can ever be revealed. All the oracles and powers of this world are silent when it comes to the mystery of first cause. This is not spoken, this is not known, this is not bought, this is not carved upon the shaft of spears. It is known by a mystery in the Spirit. And this mystery in the Spirit and its achievement is represented by the legend of Parzival. And how it was achieved, and the lonely pilgrimage, all these things are found set forth in the story of the guileless fool, who ultimately becomes the king of the Grail, or the king of those who serve the pure fountain of everlasting life. In the Odinic mysteries, men drank of blood from a cup formed of a human skull. In the mystery of the Grail, men took the Eucharist of the blood of God from a mysterious cup called Exilus, the cup that is said to have been cut from the emerald that was broken from the crest of Lucifer when he fought with Michael in the great war in heaven. These legends and these fables recur again and again, but their ethical, moral, spiritual significance is consistent throughout. And I think there is nothing that is more near to us in time of strife or trouble than to realize that the fears, the sorrows, the anxieties that beat in upon us as the future looks dark and tragedy seems to be inevitable is in a wonderful way our sharing in the utter sadness of Odin, in his realization that a fate beyond his own is moving him inevitably to darkness. And this fate, this mysterious and relentless force, is not evil. This is the relentless force of truth that must ultimately dissolve all error. And because this truth is one, and this truth is universal, it must along the way destroy one of man's most priceless possessions, and that is the sense of separateness, the sense of his own identity, the sense that he and God are different beings, or that he and his brother are different beings, and that he therefore can succeed and can be master over his brother and can be conqueror over other men. This dream of power, this dream of the aggrandizement of self, this dream is fated by a power beyond man, beyond mind, and beyond those lesser gods that formed the world, fated to die. And in its death, it releases something that must then live and must grow and must become the child of the new heaven and the new earth. And that is the mysterious, guileless thing which was called Parsifal. The simplicity of the truth seeker. The simplicity of those who can be still to know, and those in whom the great will to power has given place to the great faith to accept. Because only in this way can the mystery that is locked with the All-Father be discovered. It seems in those ways, and perhaps with many a metapolitical instinct in the back of his mind, that Richard Wagner has set forth a tremendous moral concept, a tremendous pageantry of symbolism, and in so doing has also exposed some of the deepest phases of man's psychic life, and perhaps touched the greatest problem that man must face, his fear of the future. And this fear must remain until man's own consciousness reveals to him, in silence, in meditation, and in contrition of spirit, that there is nothing to fear, and that this nothing to fear is also the substance of all hope, for man is going forth to truth, to a better world than he has ever known. But to win it, the old gods and heroes must fight and die within himself. And these include that magnificent heroic group of opinions which are the falling sickness of most of us. All these old things, these ways that had to be, these notions that are more sacred than life, they must all cease, because the only thing that lives on is the silence and the peace that follows after the day when the universe and all there is falls into space. For when man's mortal universe returns to the abyss, then man is born. For he cannot be born until the errors in him which bind him to lesser creations have died away and have been reduced again to their natural substances. As the alchemist says, the philosopher's stone cannot be fashioned of the metals until every metal in the compound has first died. And man cannot achieve to the mystery until he has died out of the illusion. He cannot awaken until he has seen the dream fade into nothingness. So all these things are part of the nostalgia of an ancient people, but perhaps in their own dawn time they were close to the psychic life in themselves and nature, and have left us a wonderful and valuable record. Well, time is up, so we'll see you again next time.